Hi everyone, you're watching an episode of Chinese History Legendary Figure Painting, where I share the juicy backstory of Yang Guifei, the subject of one of my recent paintings. The vast majority of images shown in this video are by Tang artists, though some are also by modern-day illustrators, so please check out their incredible work in the reference links that I've included in the description below. So in one of my paintings, I painted Yang Guifei floating in a lotus pond. She is known as one of the four great beauties of ancient China, with a face so fair that she puts flowers to shame. Her story is one of love that reached the greatest heights, only to end in total and utter tragedy. Yang Guifei was born as Yang Yuhuan in 719 during the Tang Dynasty. She was the youngest of four daughters to a regional census official serving in what is now modern-day Sichuan. Her father died when she was relatively young, so Yang was actually raised by her uncle's family. At this time, the Tang Dynasty emperor was already well into the height of his 44-year reign. With the help and influence of his well-appointed and capable chancellors, the Tang Dynasty was reaching the climax as what historians would now call the golden age of Imperial China. The Tang held a quarter of the world population at likely 80 million people, with Chang'an, its capital, as the most populous city in the world. The Tang Dynasty not only enjoyed a highly diverse and cosmopolitan culture, but it also secured a strong military to protect its border relationships and lucrative trade routes like the Silk Road. Religious and technological advancement went hand in hand, as the introduction of woodblock printing allowed religious texts and sutras to be created and distributed more cheaply. The prominence of education and civil service through imperial examinations was also accompanied by an explosion of literature, poetry, and philosophy. Leisure activities, sports, art, and music were all well appreciated by the upper classes of civil and aristocratic elites. Even women benefited from more liberal-minded social policies. All in all, this was a time of political stability, economic prosperity, and significant advances in education, religion, arts, and culture. Now, Yang really thrived in this environment, and when she was only 14 years old, she was married to the imperial prince Li Mao. He was the oldest son of the emperor and consort Wu. At this time, consort Wu, Yang's now mother-in-law, was the most important woman in the emperor's eyes. Though she lobbied heavily to have Li Mao named crown prince, she did not succeed, having died not long after her son's marriage. Her death drove Xuanzong into deep depression. Already he had begun to weary of his affairs of state and increasingly indulged in the kind of pleasure-seeking and lavish lifestyle that the most powerful empire in the world could offer him. However, despite all of the worldly pleasures and also the responsibility of governing an empire before him, Xuanzong could not be roused into action. He was a man of deep feeling, and consort Wu's death literally left him at sea. Meanwhile, Yang was living in the palace not far from her father-in-law, completely unaware, completely oblivious of how her life would be completely changed by this man. Legend has it that one day, while walking in the gardens, Yang came across the flowers of a mimosa plant. As she leaned close to smell its fragrance, the mimosa found itself completely eclipsed by Yang's beauty and retracted its blossoms at her touch. From then on, word of her lovely appearance spread through the court like wildfire. She had a face that put flowers to shame, a plump and pleasing figure, and incredibly fair porcelain skin. Finally, the emperor took notice, and for the first time since consort Wu's death, Xuanzong found a reason to live again. He was 54 years old and madly in love with his 19-year-old daughter-in-law. Now, looking back in history, I try to keep an open mind about what's considered socially acceptable behavior. I could have easily believed that the Tang emperor was so powerful that he could have taken his son's wife at will, and no one would have said a thing. But apparently that was not the case in 8th century China. Even the all-powerful Emperor Shenzong could not marry Yang. By all accounts, she was considered his daughter now, and Confucian customs, which held the relationship between father and child sacred above all else, denied even the emperor the object of his love. She was forbidden fruit, and perhaps all the more enticing because of it. So, what kind of woman was Yang? Beyond being extraordinarily beautiful, what do we really know about her? I couldn't find any account on Yang beyond what is in imperial record and passed down in legend. Like many underrepresented groups in history, we gather what we know based on history recorded through the eyes of others. So much of what I infer about this woman is a reflection of her time and also of the man who fell so deeply in love with her, to take him as a mirror into her person. So let's get to know the Emperor Shenzong better. Shenzong's ascension to the throne was preceded by all the sinister political intrigue, bloody family backstabbing, and imperial upheaval that any Hollywood director could wish for. He was a grandson of the only officially recognized Empress Regnant in Chinese history, who had co-opted the throne from her much weaker sons. In a series of power struggles far too complicated for me to do justice here, let's just say that the throne would volley and pass among various hands of emperors, empresses, regents alike for nearly 20 years. But Shenzong ultimately outmaneuvered them all through multiple coups and intrigue, and he became emperor in 712. Now, for someone to succeed in such a highly toxic environment, you might think that Shenzong was just some ruthless, power-hungry mastermind, but he was in fact a man of many talents. He was not only handsome and musical, he practiced calligraphy and wrote poetry as well. His interests also tended towards the outdoors. As a young man, he was a great hunter, and like all the aristocratic families, he was wild about archery, hawking, polo, and of course horses. In his court, prancing horses would often be seen entertaining him, even concluding their performance by taking a cup of wine in their mouths and drinking it down in one gulp, as shown in this sculpture. He had a lover's soul and an immense appreciation for the arts, both domestic and exotic. He had a cosmopolitan interest in world affairs. And just a deep desire, actually, for open debate of ideas and philosophies in his court. Shenzong also made it a habit of collecting thousands upon thousands of concubines. He had a lot of love to give and a lot of women to give it to. He had more concubines than most Tang emperors. He hoarded them, actually, in such a way that some of these women were not even granted their freedom until they were 60 years old. With these women, he fathered 59 formally recognized children, about 50-50 sons and daughters. However, we know that he especially favored only a small number of women in his life. His wife, Empress Wang, Consort Wu, who we met before, and Yang. Empress Wang was kind of like the woman in the story who marries a man years before he makes it. She's there for him, helping him from the beginning, but then, of course, gets cast aside as soon as he hits the big time. Wang supported Shenzong in his bid for the throne and participated in her husband's coup to overthrow his grandmother. As empress, Wang was known to have talked with her husband here and there about policy, represented the imperial household in symbolic ceremonies that supported farming and the like, and was known to have been just incredibly kind to her servants as well. So she's really sounded like a dream. But of course, in this world, no good woman goes unpunished, and Empress Wang eventually fell out of favor with her husband because of her age and fading beauty, and also because she could never produce a son. Desperate to keep her husband, she ended up alienating him further by bickering with him more and more often, driving him into the arms of another woman. Wang eventually was deposed, reduced to commoner status, and died shortly afterwards. Upon her death, Shenzong did regret his ill treatment of her, but it was too little too late, and he seemed to console himself quite well with woman number 2, Consort Wu. Consort Wu was already the apple of the emperor's eye well before the empress was out of the picture. She was actually his cousin. They shared the same infamous grandmother who reigned as empress regnant before being overthrown by Shenzong himself. For this reason, Consort Wu was never officially made empress, though Shenzong definitely wanted to. People were still kind of traumatized by the previous Empress Wu that they weren't really up for having a second one. Nevertheless, her rank was elevated to the highest level for a consort at the time, and as we covered before, she was basically the de facto lady of the imperial house for the rest of her life. Consort Wu was known to have been incredibly ambitious, political, and conniving, especially when it came to promoting her son, Li Mao, Yang's husband. She was desperate for him to be made crown prince, and she even has been credited for hatching this like super evil plot to kill 3 of his rivals that led to their eventual executions. Apparently, she had been continuously haunted by visions of the 3 dead princes thereafter, so she probably lived to regret it. Finally, we arrive at the woman of the hour, Yang Yuhuan, Xuanzong's daughter-in-law, who, where we last left off, finally made life worth living again for the middle-aged emperor after Consort Wu died. But now, how do we get through the moral quandary that is his son's marriage? Let's be clear here that we're in a time when, quote, free love was absolutely banned in ancient China and was widely condemned as an offense to public decency, according to the traditional Confucian ethic codes. Not only was the arranged marriage formally favored by society, but it was also politically supported and enhanced by law. Marriage, in effect, was the cornerstone to order in Confucian society, and everyone had to follow specific codes and patterns when it came to getting married, as determined by one's parents, official matchmakers, and the rule of law. Men and women didn't even see each other before their wedding day, resulting in many unequal and loveless matches over time. The odds of marrying your soulmate were so ridiculously tiny that upper-class men instead often visited brothels and engaged in lively, intelligent conversation and enjoyed the company of talented, musical courtesans. The emperor could, of course, do so with his many concubines, but he could not make Yang one of them, with his son's marriage standing in the way. Forcing a divorce and taking Yang as his consort would have drawn the stark disapproval of his court, so instead, the emperor made Yang leave her marriage by becoming a Taoist nun first. For 7 years, Yang lived as a nun by day and by night was secretly escorted to the emperor's quarters. After a respectable amount of time, like 5 years, in which Li Mao was finally appointed a new bride and remarried, was Yang then reintroduced into the court and given a newly created title for the highest consort and made Yang Guifei in 745. Pretty shady. Now, shady as all of this was, by all accounts, Shenzong and Yang were actually, in fact, very happy together. Skeptics might say that a beautiful woman and her all-powerful sugar daddy had no reason to not be happy, but their relationship was very likely more than that. We now know that Shenzong was an educated and talented man, and to hold his interest, Yang must have been more than just a pretty face. She was known to be a skilled musician, singer, and a lover of poetry herself. She was vivacious, a truly inspired dancer, and a devoted horsewoman. She and the emperor apparently would spend hours talking late into the night while bathing in the hot springs of the famous Huaqing Palace. They must have been, simply put, soulmates who happened to find each other in spite of the rigorous barriers set up by their social customs at the time. Now, well before Yang came into the picture, the emperor himself was getting a little old and probably just tired of his official duties and state responsibilities. His chancellors were having trouble keeping his eye on the ball, and it only got worse with someone like Yang acting as a constant distraction. Blinded by his own happiness, the emperor wanted nothing more than to retire and do as he pleased. His chancellors, who tried to be honest and rein in his actions for the benefit of the country, were soon replaced by those who flattered his whims and desires. as an absent emperor was a benefit for ambitious scholar politicians to amass greater power and wealth behind his back. Yang and her family were particularly spoiled rotten during this time. They received all kinds of favors, gifts, titles, and positions of power from the emperor, and everyone tried to curry favor with them, of course, knowing that they had the greatest influence on the throne. One of Yang's cousins managed to attain a position as the emperor's chancellor at this point. But despite his apparent success, he was incredibly insecure and jealous and fearful of his rivals, particularly a military fellow named An, who, due to flattery and maneuverings of his own, increasingly gained more and more power in the north and eventually got a huge chunk of the Chinese army under his command. In 755, at the height of the Tang Dynasty, when it seemed impossible to imagine that any outside attack could succeed against it, it was ultimately an internal rebellion that brought the Tang's downward spiral. Commander An marched with his seasoned rebel army on Luoyang, capturing the second largest city and causing Shenzong's court to flee the capital of Chang'an until they could regroup. Along the way, the imperial soldiers grew so angry at the state of affairs that even though there was probably enough blame to go around from the emperor on down, it was ultimately the Yang family that got it all. The soldiers executed the chancellor, Yang Guifei's cousin, and killed many of the Yang family before the emperor had to step in to stop the slaughter. The soldiers grew only angrier and demanded that Yang Guifei be sentenced to death as well. The Yang family fortunes had truly turned. They went from being the most rich and powerful to being the most hated family of all, and the soldiers could not be satisfied unless the weed of corruption had been torn from its roots, truly believing that the root of all their problems boiled down to one woman, Yang Guifei. Now, the emperor initially refused to give up his beloved consort, but in the end he had to comply with the soldiers' demands. Both the emperor and Yang knew that though it wasn't necessarily fair, when it came down to the emperor choosing between the love of one woman and the love of one's country, his country came first. In the end, rather than lose the loyalty of his followers and protectors of the Tang Dynasty, the emperor sacrificed his personal happiness. Yang Guifei was strangled to death by the emperor's most trusted eunuch using a length of silk in a Buddhist shrine and was buried unceremoniously in nothing but a perfumed bag. The emperor abdicated the throne to one of his sons shortly afterwards and served only as retired emperor. Shenzong would fade away into history and join his love 5 years after her death. Though he lived to see the capital recaptured and the Tang Dynasty reestablished, it was no longer the same empire it once was. In the intervening years, regional military governorships that had already started to proliferate during his reign ended up taking a greater hold and weakened the central government's authority in state matters even further. These military governors phased out civil service offices in favor of hereditary appointments and lines of succession, setting the stage for the end of the Tang and plunging China into war and political upheaval between more than a dozen concurrent states. And that is the story of the doomed love of Yang Guifei and Emperor Shenzong of the Tang Dynasty. There are alternate endings floating around. Some say Shenzong himself strangled her. Some say Yang Guifei hanged herself. Some say she even escaped to Japan. Whether you consider Yang Guifei to be just a selfish temptress who got her just desserts or a tragic Helen of Troy kind of character whose only mistake was to fall in love, it's really anyone's guess. Personally, I like to think that she was probably a little of both. But if any lesson is to be learned from this story, it's probably that gem of a line from The Amazing Spider-Man: with great power comes great responsibility. A normal man of normal social status might have been able to indulge in his relationship blind to the world around him without too many negative consequences. But that doesn't happen when you're emperor. The political and economic stability of Shenzong's country and consequently the prosperity of his people depended on his unfailing leadership and that of those he appointed to positions of power. It was a delicate balance that required constant attention, and he neglected his duty as emperor for his own personal bliss. Not to say that Shenzong made the wrong choice. I don't know that many of us could have withstood the pressure of being a head of state for so long so successfully without making one fatal mistake or another eventually. But history does go down, putting a woman at the center of this conflict. Yang Guifei, a woman so beautiful, as the popular Chinese saying now goes, that she puts flowers to shame. And that's another episode of Chinese History Legendary Figure Painting. Again, if you have any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future topics, please do let me know by leaving a message below. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.